Thanks so much, Debbie. And thanks also to Tamara, Gretchen, Rebecca, and the rest of the team at WRAG for the opportunity to speak to you today. I hope that when you leave here today, you're inspired to continue to think and act in innovative ways to create new partnerships across jurisdictional lines. My talk this morning has three parts. First, I'll describe the challenges that we as a nation are facing, including the lingering effects of the Great Recession and the shrinking role of the federal government, which is doubly felt here in the greater Washington, D.C. region. Then I'll talk about places that have moved to more regionally cooperative efforts, such as Denver and Northeast Ohio. And I'll conclude with some thoughts about what national trends and regional collaboration means in the greater Washington region, and specifically the kind of role that philanthropy can play as a starting point for experimenting with new ideas and catalyzing change, to echo some of the points about innovation that Tamara has already made. So the message of the Metropolitan Revolution, it took us a whole book, but you can basically explain it in a sentence. In the face of, the message of the Metropolitan Revolution is that in the face of federal dysfunction and drift, cities and metropolitan areas and the networks of people who govern them are stepping up to address our most pressing challenges. Even 7 years after the depths of the recession, we still have not gained enough jobs to recover what we lost during the downturn and to keep pace with population growth and labor market dynamics. We're about 3 million jobs short of where we need to be. We also still have not figured out how to create better jobs to grow wages and incomes for lower and middle class workers and to reverse the troubling and decades-long rise in inequality. In fact, census data tells us that between 2000 and 2011, the number of poor and near poor people in the United States rose from 81 million to 107 million. That's over 1/3 of the total population of this country. And I don't know if some of you saw the column in the New York Times yesterday that focused on the rise of the very poor in this country. In the wake of the Great Recession, it's become clear that the United States, like many nations, needs a new growth model. We've come to the limits of an economy built on consumption and debt. Instead, we need a next economy that focuses more on production and exports, on research and development, and on opportunity for people on all rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. The challenges of the federal government over the last several years have made it clear that the feds are not going to make the kinds of economic shifts that we need. The federal government's predicament is not just about partisanship, it's about math. In the coming years, mandatory spending, mainly on entitlement programs, and interest payments on the federal debt will take up an ever larger share of the federal budget, crowding out so-called discretionary spending. And I always think it's funny that it's called discretionary spending because it's the spending on what we think the government is supposed to do. But that is getting crowded out. As Stephen Fuller has pointed out repeatedly, our region is doubly hit by the shifts in federal spending. Like all regions, we suffer when discretionary spending shrinks. But uniquely, we feel the federal drawdown especially intensely because of the outsized impact of the federal government on our regional economy as an employer, as a purchaser of goods and services, and as a buyer and renter of office space. All of those activities have significant follow-on effects in our retail, office, and housing markets. So in the absence of federal leadership, and in many cases state leadership, the Metropolitan Revolution means that smart local and metropolitan leaders aren't waiting for the federal government. Instead, they're stepping up and doing the hard work to grow jobs and make their communities more prosperous. Now, we tend to think almost exclusively of the world in terms of feds, states, and cities, so it's easy to overlook the incredible power of metropolitan areas. The nation's 100 largest metropolitan areas are the engines of our economy and centers of trade and investment. They sit on just 1/8 of our land area, but they're home to 2/3 of our population, and they produce 3/4 of our GDP. And on every indicator that matters, human capital, innovation, infrastructure, they account for 75, 80, even 85% of the national share. So it's not surprising that when it comes to reorienting our economy in the wake of the Great Recession, we start at the metropolitan level. Now, the animation that I'm about to play uses Chicago as an example, but the point is the same, that metros are bigger than the sum of their parts.
When we talk about cities today, we don't just mean downtowns and skyscrapers. Take the Chicago metropolis. 9.5 million people spread across 3 states, 6 satellite cities, 14 counties, and 554 municipalities. People work in one town, live in another, go to church or the doctor in yet another, and everyone roots for the same sports teams. The metropolis is the true geography of our lives. It's also the competitive unit of the global economy. Metros concentrate people and assets that, taken together, make economies hum. The Metropolitan Revolution depends on melting away political boundaries to compete and prosper on the global stage.
This next slide just starts to give you an indication of how interwoven the greater Washington region is. As he said in the video, every weekday, tens of thousands of people cross municipal borders to go between home and work. And this doesn't count the myriad other trips for school, shopping, socializing, and other activities. In fact, if you look only at commuter flows into the district, you get a sense of this interdependence. And if we had layered on the commuter flows, even from the larger suburban counties, you would have seen a slide that looks a lot like a bowl of spaghetti. So in our book, Bruce Katz and I tell the story of several metros that have overcome traditional ways of working to reach across boundaries and create ecosystems in which people can flourish and the economy can grow. I want to say a little more about 2 of these examples to show how metropolitan leaders are recognizing the economic and political necessity before them and rising to the challenge. The first story comes from Denver. This is a 10-county metropolitan area. Now, a lot of times when I talk about especially collaborative regions, people seem to believe that there's something different about those regions. The people are somehow nicer, or they don't have the same kind of difficult history that we have in our region. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, however, the Denver region suffered greatly from tensions around land, tax revenue, and race. There was a lot of dispute around annexation of Denver, and of course that was tied into issues of school districts, segregation, and busing. Led by the suburban counties, the state of Colorado passed a constitutional amendment that effectively landlocked Denver. They said, you can't grow anymore. So this region did not have a history of all kinds of groovy, hand-holding, kumbaya collaboration. But in the 1980s, a sharp downturn in the energy market caused business leaders, residents, and others to realize that the economy doesn't respect municipal boundaries. Now, as a response to its own economic difficulties, the state of Colorado cut funding for museums and cultural institutions, which were mostly located in the city of Denver. As they sought to fill the gap, the leaders of these institutions realized that most visitors were from the suburbs and that these were not just local jewels, but regional ones. So these leaders launched a collaborative effort to create a cross-municipality tax district to raise revenue for Denver's Art Museum, its Natural History Museum, and Zoo, with the understanding that these assets benefit the broader region. The tax passed in 1988 and has been renewed several times. And again, just for a bit of context, the state of Colorado has passed an anti-tax increase amendment called the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. So again, it's not as if the citizens of Colorado are just generally more willing to open their wallets and be taxed. It's that people in the Denver region believe that their money is going for something good, and they understand the value of these institutions to the region as a whole. That success with the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District has led to other collaborations and other successes. One of the longstanding networks in the region is the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation. Leaders of this organization were among the first in the nation to understand that in the global economy, the competition is not between the different counties on the map, but between the Denver metropolitan area and the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, or the Austin, or Seattle, or Los Angeles metropolitan area. The Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation was created with the idea that local entities should unite for large corporate relocation competitions, trusting that their own communities and residents would benefit no matter where in the region a company chose to locate. Prior to this effort, a civic leader told us that there were over 40 local economic development agencies in the region, all competing against one another. Today, now that they have a more collaborative approach, they find that they are 10 times more successful at major economic development gains than they were before they started to collaborate. And I think the best proof that collaboration works is that they're still doing it. They've been at this for more than 20 years, and it's hard work. If they weren't getting better results, they would have quit by now. Now, mayors in some of the region's communities started to wonder whether they too could work together on a more regional basis. In 1993, a handful of mayors formed the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, a collaborative group of Denver area mayors that now counts 40 local leaders as members. Transportation became one of the caucus's main concerns. Forecasters predicted that the Denver region would add almost 1 million residents by 2025, on top of the 2.5 million that were there in 2000. And business and civic leaders feared that traffic congestion would choke the region, something that should sound a little familiar. In 2004, they launched an effort, and this was not the first time they tried to do this, it was about the third time that they tried to do it, to approve a 0.4% regional tax increase to fund the build-out of a new transportation network, a project that would cost about $4.2 billion and cover 122 miles. Now, I can't really convey this in a slide, but not long after the tax passed and when they were really in the big, difficult part of the build-out, the recession happened, so tax revenues tanked, and commodity prices shot up. So no longer were they able to promise that they would be able to deliver this project on time and on budget, and yet the Metro Mayors Caucus was able to stick together during a very difficult time and go talk to the voters and say, it's not going to be like we thought it was, but we're sticking together because we know that this is an important investment for the region. Collaboration is never perfect and it's rarely painless, but the proof that collaboration works for elected officials is that the mayors are still at it. You'll hear now from Peter Kenny, who helped establish the Metro Mayors Caucus, and Denver Mayor Michael Hancock on the value of this brand of regional and elected collaboration.
The fact that we operate by consensus has meant that sometimes there have been some tough issues that we had to let go. It's more important to these mayors to be in collaboration, to be working together with each other than it is to be able to attack everything that comes down the road.
It's like a sibling relationship. There are some times when you have tremendous highs and things are running great, and there are other times where you're frustrated and you don't seem to understand where the challenges exist or why they exist at all. But if you care enough and if it's valuable enough to you, you will work on that relationship and do everything you can to always be prepared to get over those hurdles when they present themselves. There are many cities around the world thinking about how they can compete Denver, out-compete Los Angeles, out-compete New York. As a region, if we work together, we can compete against everyone else around the world, and we can do it well. We have a greater chance to be globally connected and globally competitive.
Now, Denver's regional collaboration, as I said, started with business leaders and was carried forward by elected leaders. In other places, though, the Metropolitan Revolution is kicked off by philanthropy. A group of Northeast Ohio foundations have been working over several years to help that region, which comprises not one, but 4 metropolitan areas, build on its manufacturing heritage in a way that makes sense for the 21st century. Now, during a period in which the United States as a whole lost 25% of its manufacturing jobs, Northeast Ohio lost 44% of its manufacturing jobs. To turn Northeast Ohio's economy around, a group of philanthropies created a new organization called the Fund for Our Economic Future. It has adhered to a policy of 1 member, 1 vote. Whether a philanthropy contributes the minimum level of $100,000 over 3 years or $10 million, as the Cleveland Foundation did for the first 3 years of the fund. This is an exercise in strategic humility. You can't collaborate with somebody who sets out to dominate you, right? It's just like we learned on the playground. Nobody is going to want to play with you if you don't share your toys. And so the leadership that was shown by the Cleveland Foundations and the trust that was shown by the smaller foundations in collaborating is a really remarkable thing. The goal of the fund was to support a new economic ecosystem in the region, which could build on the raw ingredients for advanced industries, including the great universities, major healthcare centers, and technological know-how that exists in the region, and it exists in our region as well. The fund helped create new networks that connected existing strengths and linked them to people who knew how to build and invest in companies. And the results are good. The grants that the fund has made have helped add almost 17,000 jobs, $650 million in payroll, and pull $3.5 billion in investments to the regions. These gains have gained momentum over time. Northeast Ohio is still not where it needs to be economically, but there are strong signs of a turnaround. And you'll hear a little bit more about it in this upcoming video.
The first steps of the fund were not really built around a grand vision for a strategy and so forth. And it didn't even start as a fund. It began as an idea of let's just get together and talk about how we can align some of our actions, and it just mushroomed from there. The fund became this common place where we could pick a handful of priorities and lift them up and see if we could bring those things to scale. And through that sort of alignment, one can start imagining a lever big enough to perhaps shape and redirect this $180 billion Northeast Ohio economy.
So how can we take the lessons from Denver and Northeast Ohio and elsewhere to realize the Metropolitan Revolution in the greater Washington region? I think the first thing to do is to understand that the power of metropolitan areas comes from the fact that we're networks, not just governments. As we all know, governments tend to operate in silos, but metropolitan areas are networks of leaders working together across sectors and across borders. And as the examples I mentioned earlier indicate, metropolitan action is often catalyzed by leaders who are outside of government, by people in business or in philanthropy. Now, we do have some promising examples of regional collaboration here, whether it's similar responses to raising the minimum wage or formal efforts like Region Forward, the 2030 Group, and the newly announced Global Cities Initiative. These are just some of the more recent examples. Many of you have been engaged in other long-standing regional collaborations through COG and the Board of Trade and other entities. There's also a lot of operational coordination and collaboration, the sort of day in, day out, keep the lights on work around some of our regional systems. So the questions before us are, how do we build on what's happening? And more specifically, what is the role of philanthropy in this endeavor? Now, Tamara and I didn't coordinate our three-pronged approaches here, but I think you'll see that they're similar. I think that philanthropy has a role to convene, to experiment, and to catalyze change. I'll start with convening, because I think it is one of the most underrated tools of philanthropy. Convening is an antidote to what I call the superhero problem. In too many metros, people are waiting for a superhero. They're waiting for a super mayor or a business billionaire, a Michael Bloomberg, a Bill Gates, or a Mark Zuckerberg. But it's networks and not heroes that are the key to sustained action, innovation, and change in most metros. A growing body of research shows that as problems become more complicated, you do not need one genius. You need multiple minds from different sectors and perspectives. And this aligns with another body of growing research about the benefits of diversity. The more minds and broader range of perspectives you can bring to a problem, the stronger and more sustainable your solution is likely to be. Now, by convening, I don't mean hundreds of people at a big fancy event. I mean simply regular gatherings of people who can share ideas, talk about common problems, and hold each other accountable for action to solve those problems, which I suspect is what has worked very well with WRAG's leadership convenings in Loudoun County. Now, as a convener, philanthropy can provide the leadership and stewardship that networks need to succeed. A 2010 report by the Council on Competitiveness underlined the idea that you do need a kind of backbone organization to manage the convening, and a wonked out version of their quote is on there. Another way to think about what this backbone organization is you need somebody to bring the donuts. Who is going to organize the meeting? Who is going to do what needs to be done to get people there? Who is going to put in the work so that people say, yeah, That was a really good meeting. That was worth blocking off time on my calendar, getting in my car or getting on the metro. I want to continue to be part of that meeting because it makes it easier and better for me to do the work that I have to do. The second role of philanthropy is as an instigator and curator of experiments. By definition, doing new things means experimentation. And the thing about experiments is that sometimes they work, sometimes they fail, and sometimes they teach us something entirely unexpected. In the time I've been focusing on urban innovation, it's become clear to me that innovation is inseparable from risk and inefficiency. It's also clear that the innovators that are working on some of the hardest problems are using very new approaches, which often have not been proven and might not work. And it's also become clear that many institutional and individual donors prefer to make safer bets on incremental change rather than risky bets on things that might yield good results but also might fail. We cannot change the fact that innovation is inseparable from risk and inefficiency, but we can start to change some of the challenges with funding innovation by talking about past failures, by embracing what we can learn from those past failures. We have to know why some of the old approaches haven't worked, why some traditional approaches are flourishing, what new things are going well, and what's a cause for concern. And we need to share those information and those ideas, again, across sectors and across borders. The spirit of experimentation and honesty is exemplified by Thomas Edison, who said, at least according to the internet, I have not failed 10,000 times. I have simply discovered 10,000 things that won't work. And I think his second quote is even more poignant, especially when we are seeing a surge in social entrepreneurship and social innovation, people taking really big leaps and big risks to bring brave new thinking to social challenges, that many of life's failures were people who were very close to success before they gave up. Let's build again on that spirit of experimentation. Through convening and honest experimentation, philanthropy can catalyze change. What if philanthropy saw itself as the R&D department of the social sector? Now let's think about how innovation happens. Here are two graphics, one of which describes the scientific method that many of us learned in high school, and another that shows a fairly new approach to invention called design thinking or human-centered design. And you'll see that they have some points in common. First, they're based on testing, which means not knowing exactly how things are going to work out. They're also based on learning what works and what doesn't, and documenting, which is a continuous effort to go back and try again, built on what we've learned before. If we keep our failures secret and a source of shame, we're not going to get better as quickly as if we say, we tried, and here are the reasons we thought it was a good idea, and here's what disappointed us, so you won't have to make the same mistakes that we did, and let's all learn together. Because I think everybody in this room has the same goal, which is a stronger, more prosperous, and more equitable Washington region. So knowing what we know about how innovation happens really does point the way for philanthropy, because this is a sector that, unlike government and unlike the private sector, has a little bit more breathing room to tell the truth and make the mistakes necessary for learning. And the role of philanthropy dovetails quite nicely with the role of metropolitan areas. Cities and metropolitan areas are becoming leaders precisely because they are experimenting. This is the true spirit of the Metropolitan Revolution. It's not that people have achieved perfection and they're acting on a perfect system. It's that people are acting in the face of uncertainty and imperfection and grappling with them as best they can. And I'll close with one final animation to drive this point home.
From an early age, we are taught how our nation is supposed to work. The president, vice president, and members of Congress sit at the top. Governors and legislators run their states. The rest of us take our cues from them. While states and the federal government may be part of the Constitution, our population and economic power is actually concentrated in our metropolitan areas. It's time to rethink power in America. In this century, metros will lead and states and the federal government will follow. In cities and metros, public, private, and civic leaders are helping workers get the skills they need, investing in infrastructure and growing jobs through expanded trade and investment, the hard work necessary to renew our economy.
So thanks very much. I look forward to a much more invigorating panel discussion and to your questions afterwards.
I think this discussion is extremely timely. There have been many efforts in the past in the Washington area to encourage more regional collaboration because there's a recognition, and there's been a recognition for a long time, that the fragmentation of the region, especially along jurisdictional boundaries, and especially across, the Great Wall. China has the Great Wall. We have the Potomac River. The Potomac, and there's just very little collaboration across that. But there's also little collaboration, or not enough collaboration, between the district and the Maryland suburbs, and then among the Maryland suburbs and among the Northern Virginia suburbs. And there's been a lot of recognition for a long time that this was a problem, as well as a lack of collaboration across sectors, business, government, nonprofits. And so these discussions in the past haven't led to very much because these barriers were too great. But that's changed now, at least the perception has changed because of sequestration and the cuts in federal spending. Basically, there's a crisis in the regional economic model in the Washington, D.C. area because of the cutbacks in federal spending and federal contracting. And so everybody's saying, okay, now we really have to get serious about regional collaboration because the engine, or the fuel of federal spending that always kept our engine running is running out. And so there's basically a big problem that's forcing us to think differently. It inevitably recalls the famous quote of Dr. Samuel Johnson that when a man knows he is to be hanged, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. And as Jennifer pointed out, there's a lot of concentration going on right now. There's the Region Forward program of the Council of Governments, and we have Roger Berliner here, who's the next chairman of the Council of Governments. We have the 2030 group has been pushing the roadmap that many of you probably know about. WRAG is a participant in the roadmap, sort of looking at what we can do to cooperate more. And then there was just this big event, the Global Cities Initiative, which Jennifer also mentioned just in early November, sponsored by J.P. Morgan Chase and the Brookings Institution, saying that there had to be more regional collaboration in order to make us more competitive economically with other regions. So there's a lot of talk. I haven't seen, I'm a journalist, so I get to say what I think. There hasn't been a lot of action. There hasn't been anywhere near enough action. So what we're going to talk about here is what would action look like, as described very well in Jennifer's presentation, and especially at what role philanthropy can play in promoting that action and in terms of collaborating with the other sectors of government and business. So we're hoping that you'll leave here with more confidence that the region can step up to deal with the challenges posed by sequestration, and then a stronger sense of what your role can be in promoting that. Now, I think just to mention some specific areas where there's been a lot of discussion about where collaboration could make a difference, and I think areas of particular interest to this group would be housing affordability, education and job training, and also sort of getting a better reputation for the Washington region, or a stronger sense of regional identity in the Washington region. Obviously, there are other areas of interest as well, such as healthcare, the environment, and transportation. And if I could just say, a lot of the discussion has focused on trying to make the region more economically competitive. And I think certainly philanthropy has a role to play there, just as it played a role in Cleveland. I mean, where the philanthropy really took the lead in sort of encouraging economic development. But I think an area in the Washington area, I think that a role it could play personally would be to make sure that as we do these efforts, as government and business do these efforts to promote more economic competitiveness, that reducing the gaps, reducing the inequality, making sure that the least privileged are not left out in this process, and making sure that the regional collaboration includes doing more for the least privileged and do more to reduce the inequality. That's a role that philanthropy could usefully play, and one that is, of course, central to what philanthropy is all about. So we have an outstanding panel here, all senior representatives of their sectors, government, business, and philanthropy, and each of them has a good history of promoting regional identity and regional cooperation. So I'd like to ask each to take about 3 to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and then I'll ask questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So please talk briefly about, what are the main things that you see that need to be accomplished, and how can your sector and philanthropy work better to accomplish that? Roger Berliner, Montgomery County Council member and incoming chair of the Council of Governments. Roger.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me? Good morning to you, and let me say this is my first exposure, and I actually like WRAG. I'm sorry, I like WRAG. But it is my first exposure to you, and I think that's also a problem, that I don't know you better. And I hope over time we will get to know each other better, because I don't know how you can do your work unless you know what we see as government. So I appreciate this opportunity. Our region has cannibalized its own forever, okay? This is what we have specialized in. Poaching each other's, being competitive. Montgomery County and Fairfax, oh my goodness, we call Fairfax the F word, okay? I mean, right? All right? I apologize, but that's, so we are intensely competitive with one another. And it does not serve us, but it is part of our DNA. So, as Bob said, how do you get past that? Well, crisis is an opportunity, right? And so we are in a crisis mode where everything's shrinking. I think the statistic, Jennifer, you know this better than I, out of 100 metropolitan areas, our region ranks 94th over the last 5 years of economic growth. 94th out of 100.
Behind Detroit.
Yeah, absolutely. Not good, ladies and gentlemen. And so we are, as Bob indicated, for the first time beginning to really try and focus. How can we do this work together? And we're going to continue to have challenges. Anybody know Marriott? Right? Well, Marriott's thinking, oh, where is it going to be? So I promise you, the District of Columbia and Northern Virginia are going to be fighting with Montgomery County as to where Marriott will locate for the future. But at the same time, under Chuck Bean's leadership, our great executive director, Chuck, could you stand up, our Council of Governments? He really is terrific, ladies and gentlemen. We are now poised to join this Global Cities Initiative, which is designed to say, can we come together as a region for exports? Because we don't compete for exports, right? And I believe the statistics demonstrate that it isn't big corporations that change a region, moving from one city to another. It is growing your base. It is growing your mid-size corporations. So if we're going to have prosperity for all, we have to grow our economy first and foremost. And so that means understanding the limits of government, of knowing the power of networks, of knowing that we have to have a better relationship with you and our corporate partners, because governments can't do it alone. We, as a community, must do this together.
And now Josh Bernstein, who is CEO of Bernstein Management Corporation, leading business figure, and one who's very dedicated to regional collaboration.
Thank you, Bob. One of the themes you'll see in Jennifer's analysis of municipalities or metro areas that have banded together to really promote prosperity is that they've suffered a shock. There's been a huge economic decline in their region. They're empty warehouses or factories. Washington has experienced that shock, and it's less visible. We don't have shuttered factories, but make no mistake, there has been a huge shock to our economy. We heard some of the statistics today, but D.C. area lost a lot of jobs in the recession. Not only we've recovered the number of jobs, but if you dig a little deeper and look at the types of jobs that we've replaced, engineers, analysts, accountants, people making $80,000 to $100,000 a year are now replaced by people making $30,000 and $40,000 a year. So the purchasing power, the economic welfare of our community is significantly lower, and it's not going to recover. The federal government is not going to lead this region as it has for the last 50 plus years. And I'm involved with a number of different initiatives. 2030 group was mentioned. It's amazing how different the conversation is with the 2030 group. So about 7 or 8 years ago, when they started talking, maybe 9 years ago, there was tremendous resistance to growth. People who were coming in from Loudoun County and driving into Washington, D.C. weren't really interested in adding households in Fairfax and Loudoun County. They were more concerned about road congestion. So there was a lot of resistance to growth. Well, today, I think there's less resistance to growth. I think people recognize that our ability to serve the most underserved in our region, to break down the barriers that separate us, it's going to be much harder to do that if the economic engine is slowing in the region. We have way more resources if we can grow. So there are interesting parallels in business and philanthropy, and there are things that don't translate well, and I think people tend to over-apply business approaches and methods to philanthropy. But one thing I really do believe is, as a region, we compete with other regions. Austin, Denver, Atlanta. They're businesses that can go anywhere, and people that can go anywhere, and we are competing across the country and globally to attract people to come live and work here. And as Roger says, we generally compete with each other. Marriott is not leaving this region. And when we talk about those regions, municipalities competing for Marriott, they're competing by offering Marriott tax savings. Marriott will pay less if they move to Fairfax County. It's whoever it's a reverse auction, whatever makes it the cheapest for them. I think most of us in the room will agree. I love Marriott. They run nice hotels, but they can afford to pay state and local taxes, and the region will benefit if they do. So philanthropic funders, as we've heard, have the biggest impact if we can work collaboratively with business and government. We can't work on our own silos, just like the different regions can't work in their own silos. And I think the business community is often the villain. It's often blamed for the disparities, the substandard housing, all the conditions that plague the poorest and most disadvantaged in our community. We can attack business, and in some cases, business leaders or businesses deserve that criticism. But in many cases, business partners are actually the best able to address those needs. And I'm involved with, I chair the Meyer Foundation, and we have well represented here today, and involved with the Family Foundation. So I have different perspectives, and as a funder, sometimes we look at a small nonprofit who does extraordinary work serving people with drug and alcohol addiction, providing job training, providing supports to get people back into being productive members of the community. And we ask them to be a developer, and they build 20 units at a cost that may be twice or more of what a for-profit developer could build those units. Well, when I look at that project, they're doing great work, but it is not an efficient use of those resources. If that provider could team up with a for-profit developer who could build twice as many units for the same cost, and that nonprofit service provider could focus on what they do best, which is the support services, and then we need to go to government to provide incentives to create those units or to use the resources. The District of Columbia has this $100 million housing trust fund. how that money is spent can have a huge impact on the number of units that can be built. You know, housing is an extremely capital-intensive field, and $100 million sounds like a wonderful solution, but it is 1/10 of what's needed in the near term. So we've got to come up with more creative solutions. We talked about the enterprise fund. I mean, that is a great way for funders to, let's say you have $1 million of corpus and you want to allocate 5% towards housing. Well, you could fund $50,000, which does not do a lot for housing, or you could take 5% of your corpus and invest it in a housing fund where that money can be recycled and provide guarantee funds or bridge financing that can help in the creation of this. So there's some really promising things I've seen that I just want to touch on. At the Meyer Foundation, we're focusing, we've always been focused on serving the most disadvantaged and the most vulnerable in our community. Now we're focusing more on outcomes, collective action, and root causes. We've talked about racial inequity, and I'm thrilled to see WRAG taking on this thorny issue. But, racial inequity and racism creates barriers to economic opportunity. And until we address those root causes, we're not going to move the needle. We talked about the 2030 group, which is a collaboration of business leaders, university heads, and economists that are really focused on building this regional cooperation. Unfortunately, and Federal City Council, led by Tony Williams, is working on things like infrastructure trust, social impact bonds, and other collaborative community efforts. But I think we've accomplished the first step of recognizing the need for regional cooperation, but and there are some, we've taken the first step. I think there are a number of initiatives, 2030 Group, Federal City Council, COG, others are promoting regionalism, but we're all working independently. I think we've taken the first step, but to quote Jennifer, who's bringing the donuts? Nobody is stepping up to really take the lead.
I volunteer.
That's great. I mean, it's really what we need. I mean, the Global Cities Initiative that was mentioned requires someone to apply for JP Morgan Chase funds. Who's going to convene the group to apply for that? I don't know. Maybe someone in this room will take the lead on that. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Josh. And now representing philanthropy, which is the sector that most of you care most about, we have Carol Thompson-Cole, who is CEO of Venture Philanthropy Partners, and also has a very distinguished resume, both in government and private business as well. Carol.
Thank you. I'd like to use an example from Venture Philanthropy Partners to talk about how we have advanced significantly in collaboration. In 2012, VPP released the Capital Kids Report, and we said shared responsibility, shared future, and it addressed the future of young people 0 to 24 in the region. And for the first time, we really looked at what the regional impact is. Each jurisdiction had created their own reports, but we didn't collectively look at the entire region. And I think the lessons that come out of that report really can be applied across other issues to how the region can work together much better. So I think the first thing that we all have to do is to recognize that the issues and challenges don't stop at jurisdictional borders, that neither efforts, we have to ensure that we are looking at them with that regional lens. We can break them down, address them locally, but at the same time have a collective impact in terms of our region. It's also important, and I see more of it in philanthropy, that we're really collecting data and looking at issues and then using that data to determine how we would act and develop action plans from that. And like others have said, is that when you have diminishing resources, it's out of crisis that you have opportunity. And a lot of that is really driving what all of us are doing across sector, and it's creating the tables that we can really address those issues collectively. And so I think that we have come a long way. I've been now in philanthropy for 12 years, and there have been a lot of conversations, but we see much more action today than we had before. And so I think that we need to continue. I can repeat some of the things that were said about different organizations that are working together. We have widening gaps in the region. It's hard for people to understand that some of the fastest growing poverty in this region is in Upper Montgomery County and down toward Fredericksburg in Virginia. So we looked too parochially over time at what's going on and saying, oh, that's an urban issue, that's a DC issue, it's not an issue for my jurisdiction. And so now I think people are recognizing all of those kinds of changes and coming together more. We get more visits and more calls from government leaders asking how we can bring good nonprofits and bring philanthropy to the table. And I think that, to your point, you're going to see much more happen. The WRAG has been a leader. I've been on the board now my third term. And over time, I really take my hat off to Tamara for reaching out to the COG and to say, we want to be a part of Region Forward. And I also think we now have many leaders in different sectors who have been in other sectors. So to have Chuck Bean, who left philanthropy and the nonprofit sector and is leading a local regional organization is very important. I've said over the years that when I was in government, I needed philanthropy. When I was in business, I needed government. And so I think these kinds of experience now are broadening the conversation and bringing people together to work on it together, and I think it will only get better as we go forward. So the Capital Kids Report is an example. Government, philanthropy, nonprofits, businesses did support the report. We went and shopped it in all of our regions, and we started to see decisions being made very differently. The WRAG's focus area groups, there are more corporate people at the table now having and joining that conversation. And we all talk a lot about collective impact. Right now we're doing it in different ways, but I think we're moving from the conversation to activity.
Thank you very much. I think, Carol, you make a really good point about the suburbanization of poverty and the impact that that has in sort of getting everybody to feel that there's a common problem. In other words, I mean, for a long time, the conventional wisdom was that poverty was either in the city or maybe also in Prince George's County. And now you've got it, as you said, on the rise in northern Montgomery County, in parts of Fairfax, in Prince William County. And so everybody's sort of facing the same problem. Everybody's got the same problems, and that encourages a regional approach. The sort of the mirror image of that, which is looking at it more positively, is I've heard people tell me that there's greater prospects for regional cooperation now because the district is seen as a more effective partner. I mean, for a long time, the suburbs didn't want to deal with the district because they thought it was just the government was too dysfunctional, the politics were too dysfunctional. But now the district, certainly for the last 10 or more years, has been, on the way back. It's been more prosperous. The government leadership has become more effective and more respected, and so it's a better partner now than it had been before. I want to talk first, picking up on what Jennifer said about what happened in Denver. In other words, that what you saw there was the jurisdictional boundaries between city and counties and municipalities, sort of melted away, I think was the verb used, and everybody sort of cooperated across political boundaries. Now, the advantage that Denver and Northeast Ohio have is they're all in the same state. So there's only one state and one governor to worry about. We've got two states and something else, a federal district. It's a state, it's a city, it's a district. Congress is involved. Anyway, you got three jurisdictions, as well as all of the county jurisdictions and then the municipalities as well. So we're not going to get rid of the state boundaries, at least not anytime soon. So what would, Roger, I'm going to start with you. Roger, what kinds of things could happen to sort of overcome those, what new levels of cooperation, what new entities could be created, what have you, to sort of try to overcome the barriers built up by those jurisdictional boundaries. And I think two suggestions that I've heard, certainly the 2030 group and the roadmap are talking about, is, well, the one they really want is a regional transportation authority that would basically, have taxing authority and planning authority for the whole region for transportation. I think that's extremely unlikely, given that Annapolis and Richmond would basically not like it. And then another thing I've heard is seems maybe more likely is a compact, a region-wide compact on housing, where there would be agreement across jurisdictional boundaries on sort of housing policy, and especially everybody would agree to take their fair share of affordable housing. But maybe there are other ideas as well where people could cooperate.
So, as between the two, I think we should probably still focus on transportation. I think the affordable housing allocation will set up a whole different set of dynamics. I am so eager to learn more about the affordable housing. I'm sorry, talk to me. What's the impact note? Okay, I'm eager to learn more about it. Our county is struggling, and we were national leaders in affordable housing, and we are not close to doing what we need to do. So any models that are out there, we certainly need to understand them. I continue to believe what our region has historically focused on and what it continues to need to focus on is the transportation piece. Metro. I mean, oh my goodness, it is so important to our region, and it is currently not doing so well, right? And we all know that. And again, we now have an opportunity where the federal government has come to the Council of Governments and said, we are going to oversee safety for Metro. But actually, it's your job, states, and you need to come up with a new oversight body that actually has regulatory authority and teeth. What will that mean? It will mean all three jurisdictions have to pass the same legislation. Okay? That hasn't happened in a long time. And it gives an opportunity for us to come together and provide this function. And I actually am one who believes in a regional authority as well. And I think we could get there. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about gasoline prices now at $2. Okay? If this were not a time for there to be serious conversation among thought leaders about a regional gas tax to fund things like Metro, then I don't know when it will ever be. So that the jurisdictions that are around this area, Fairfax, Montgomery, Prince George's County, DC, Arlington, we all get together and say, okay, this is what's important to us, and we come up with our own compact. And then we ask the states, because I agree with Jennifer, the power has shifted to local governments, and local governments and our region need to step up in this vacuum and drive the conversation. And that's when things change.
And if I could jump in, I think there's a flat-out economic case to be made. I think that certainly for more concern on the part of Annapolis and Richmond for the state of Metro. Because whether they like it or not, the Washington, D.C. region is a big economic player and a huge element of the health economically of Virginia and of Maryland. And I'm not sophisticated enough at economic modeling to do this, but I think it's a knowable thing to talk about the economic impact within the borders of Maryland and the economic impact of Metro within the borders of Virginia and make that case that this supports the airport investments, this supports a range of other massive infrastructure investments. And don't call it a gas tax, right? Call it a call it a be able to get from point A to point B in a human timescale tax, right? If more people are on Metro, they're not on the road. So there are ways to, I think, address this that can start to make the case that it is in the larger interest of these states not to strangle one of their best economic value providers.
There's no question that that's right, but I'm going to exercise the moderator's privilege here and ask that we not keep talking about metro and transportation for two reasons. The main reason is that I think it's less relevant than a lot of other topics to philanthropy. I mean, it's something for government and business and politicians to be involved, but it's really not something I think that touches on philanthropy. But also, with all due respect, you can make that economic case as much as if you want, but the parochial interests in Richmond and Annapolis, they do not want, the last thing they want to see happen is that Fairfax and Montgomery County tax themselves for their own purposes. Because Richmond and Annapolis, they want to get that tax money to spend elsewhere. And your argument is dead on accurate about the economic benefits of this, but it's
in the capital.
Exactly. It's just.
But if Denver can do it, why can't we? Well, I mean, the people in this room can agitate, business leaders can agitate, and government has to respond. So I really don't like that it's too hard and it won't work. That we shouldn't give up on it. If it's what's needed, let's speak up about it. I mean, the obvious answer is we need a regional body that has some teeth, and teeth is taxing authority, to be able to address these issues, which are all interconnected, by the way. Housing affordability isn't just about the cost of housing. It's about the cost of getting from your home to your job. It's about your wages. You know, why don't we have a regional minimum wage? That would resolve a lot of the issues about one jurisdiction having a different, raising a minimum wage absent the other jurisdictions acting. So
every discussion in Washington comes down to transportation.
Bob, I'll accept your invitation, though. I'll accept your invitation.
Well, no, regional cooperation and regional action, collaborative regional action that impacts all of us. That isn't.
Let's talk poverty. Okay. Montgomery County. Everything's wonderful in Montgomery County, right? Isn't that what everybody believes? I mean, we're streets are paved with gold. We have more kids on free and reduced meals in our schools than the District of Columbia has kids in its schools. A third of our kids in Montgomery County are on free and reduced meals. Poverty is real and increasing. The economy has totally changed. The jobs that are available are low-paying jobs. This is so serious. And our kids are going to school, and oh my goodness, kids in poverty, there's a summer program. What is the Summer Slide program? First time, philanthropy brought a Summer Slide program. The Rails Foundation came to us and said, we're actually operating in Baltimore. Your school system can't afford to do it. Will you, the county government, fund a Summer Slide program so that kids in poverty don't fall farther and farther behind? Thank you, philanthropy, for making that possible.
Thank you. Carol.
I want to focus on the convening and the agitating.
There you go.
And so philanthropy is the right sector to really focus on this. One of the mistakes I think I made since I've been in philanthropy is Shirley Marcus Allen, who's here, was a partner at VPP at the time, and she just moved around this region and talked to people. And one of the things around poverty is that we found that a lot of the suburban jurisdictions were beginning to address issues that they had never addressed before. And being a former social services director in Baltimore, she said, let's have a dinner. So you need donuts, you need dinner, you need wine. And so we started having we started having dinners. And after a while, the group said, you know, you're asking us the right questions, you're bringing us to the table. We are with each other, we're in a lot of meetings, but we don't have these kind of conversations. We don't have the opportunity to really grapple with what the problems are and how we can solve them. And so Shirley said, we need to keep doing this. And one day I said, we just don't have enough time to keep having dinners. Well, when I look back 12 years and see what we're trying to do in the region, in different suburban jurisdictions around issues of poverty, if we had continued to do those dinners, that we would have been well on the way to the leaders working together and solving problems, and bringing the nonprofit and philanthropic organizations together to resolve them. And so we have to take responsibility to be the convener, to be the backbone, to be the ones that fund innovation and also take the risks, because we can agitate. I've been in business, and business will only go so far because they're concerned about their self-interest and their profit. And then we're the organizations and the leaders that really need to foresee issues and bring people together and keep them at the table until we get to solutions.
Okay, I want to follow up on that. You all got this copy of Jennifer's book, but I got it early, so I was able to read it ahead of time. And looking at the Northeast Ohio experience, philanthropy there, really played a leading role in encouraging economic development. A bunch of philanthropies got together and created the Fund for Our Economic Future, which has given more than $60 million to regional economic development organizations. And since donuts is one of the main themes here, one thing they got is they played a critical role in getting everybody to cooperate to get a $30 million federal grant to start a new National Manufacturing Innovation Institute. And the quote, the killer quote from the director of regional engagement, quote, "The fund put in $25,000 to buy the donuts, and we got a $30 million return on investment." So that's a great, success story, but I'm wondering how relevant it is in Washington. And I want to ask each of you this question because I think it's very relevant, and then we'll get to questions that we've got from the audience. And that is, so in Northeast Ohio, philanthropy came together and they put a lot of money in to finance economic development. Is that what should philanthropy be doing more of that here, encouraging regional economic development, or should they leave that to business and government and focus on sort of related, it's all interconnected, right? Related fields such as housing affordability, such as education and workforce development. I mean, things that will help with economic development, but not sort of startup, trying to fund startups or doing the kind of thing that regional economic development corporations usually do. Carol.
I don't think there's anything that we shouldn't attempt to do. When you look out at the nonprofit sector, there are nonprofit organizations doing some of everything that a for-profit organization is doing. And so I think you first determine what is the problem or the issue you're trying to address. And then who are the key players that need to come to the table, and then figure out what your role is. We created what's called Youth Connect. We applied to the federal government. Philanthropy, we thought maybe we shouldn't go there. Because I came out of government, I said we need to go there. Government has more money than we have, and we need to leverage each other's dollars. And so Rashern Baker came to us and asked us to bring Youth Connect to Prince George's County. And so we said, Rashern, you have to commit to do the things that government does well, and we will bring what we need, the innovation, the nonprofits, the high performers, but then we need to go to the business community. And so we've been working for 1 year. Youth Connect is now in Suitland High School, and we have a family, the Peterson family, that has worked with VPP to create a philanthropic fund that will allow us to go into 2 other schools. And I use that as an example. We just have to keep building on each other in the different sectors. And our hope is eventually to take Youth Connect to every jurisdiction in this region. So I think you have to have a big picture, and then you have to go down and move it, but you all have to come in there in the right way together.
Josh, what role would you like to see philanthropy play?
Well, if we care about outcomes, we are stakeholders in the economic prosperity of the region. I mean, if we're a foundation, our corpus is dependent on growth. Tax revenues of jurisdictions are dependent on growth. I mean, we can do more to provide economic opportunity for all of our residents if the region is growing. I mean, Detroit has a really hard time when you've eviscerated an economy. So we're all stakeholders in supporting growth to be more effective at what we want to accomplish.
Roger?
I guess I have a more conventional mind, but I was so startled by Jennifer's observation, and it's true for you. The philanthropy community really has the greatest capacity for innovation. And governments fear failure. And so it's very important for people like you to step forward and say, you can do more, and we'll help you do more. And make us an offer we can't refuse to get out of our own way. So I am hopeful that this Global Cities Initiative will create a new culture in our region, because by coming together to support exports where we're not competing, what the Global Cities Initiative has discovered is that that plants a different seed in the region in terms of cooperation and collaboration. And so we need to build first, and my hope is that if we do this piece, we will see that it is in our interests to further the collaboration. I mean, to have all of our economic development people coming together, we haven't been able to achieve that yet. So if we can get this piece, my hope is that it begins to transform the culture of our region to be more collaborative and less competitive.
Yeah, well, I would certainly agree that the philanthropy, can agitate, as Carol said, can agitate for the regional development bodies to cooperate more. But what I'm trying to get at is whether or not philanthropy should actually use its fairly limited resources in this region compared to other regions to actually be putting its money into that as opposed to affordable housing or education or something like that. I want to ask Jennifer that question.
I think that the challenge really before us is that economic development and affordable housing and minimum wage, we see those as separate conversations. What kind of jobs are we developing? What kind of housing are we developing? I imagine employers think a lot about housing costs in a region because that affects their pay scale, that affects the kind of workers they have. So I think one thing that philanthropy can do is say, it's the same conversation. And each entity might be taking one element of that conversation, but the kinds of jobs that we are creating in this region matter. And it matters for family stability, and it matters for kids' school preparedness. It's all one sort of thing. So just making that statement, I think, is huge. And that's what they did in Cleveland or Northeast Ohio, because a lot of the foundations came to them and said, we don't do economic development. We do domestic violence prevention, and we do arts and culture. And they the leaders of this effort made a strong case that you will be less successful in any of your other efforts if our economy continues to slide as it has. So if you want strong families, if you want kids who are ready to learn and experience culture and arts and live up to their potential, you need to think about the kind of jobs you have and the impact that has on families.
I would totally agree with what Jennifer just said, but I think the overriding importance is that we have to build relationships, and we have to start trusting each other and stop being skeptical about each other's motives and motivations, and just get to work.
Okay, we're down to the last few minutes, so I want to get to some of the questions. We're not going to have time for all of them, but there's a couple, at least a few that I wanted to get to. So this is for Roger. What are the chances that multiple jurisdictions will agree to certain funding levels or taxes for critical issues like affordable housing?
Well, I know it's a big issue in our county. I don't know the extent to which we would have a compact with respect to this. This is a new conversation for me. I'm grateful to hear it in terms of a unified regional approach. The people from Prince George's County say to me, gosh, Montgomery County, we are your affordable housing. Well, that doesn't work. Okay, I get that. That doesn't work. And it doesn't work in terms of transportation, congestion, quality of life. So our county gets that we have a lot of work to do, and there's going to be an ongoing conversation as to how much we commit to housing initiative fund of our own in Montgomery County. I just don't know whether or not it will translate into a regional approach. I am certainly open to that.
I think a regional approach is really critical on affordable housing, and that's because there's an incentive, a built-in incentive, which I don't think gets enough attention, for each jurisdiction to basically have jobs and high-end housing in their jurisdiction, because then they get maximized tax revenue, and have all the workforce and lower income people and cheaper housing in other jurisdictions. So you get rewarded basically for doing the wrong thing, and I think that only some kind of regional approach can overcome that.
Well, Bob, I got to tell you that I hear from our employers, let's a number of hospitals, for example, say, Councilmember Berliner, if we don't have affordable housing in Montgomery County, our workforce cannot get to us. So
Right.
I think that dynamic has changed onto itself. I don't perceive that I can depend on Prince George's County or the District of Columbia to provide our affordable housing. I think we get that our future requires us to have affordable housing in Montgomery County.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. Now, for Josh, what would it take to get more foundations to do the type of impact investing, tapping into their corpus that you referred to in your opening comments?
I think the people in this room taking the lead and telling their peers that you can do it. I mean, it doesn't come at a big price. If bond yields are ridiculously low, if you have a portion of your investable corpus in bonds, instead of getting 2.5%, maybe you get 1.5% with a portion of that money. It's really does not come at a big consequence. I think businesses can do this. Certainly foundations can do it. And I think the area's largest employers have a huge incentive to participate in this. So I think we need to lead by example and spread the word.
Okay, I have the last question for Carol, speaking for philanthropy. What are some specific practical means for building trust among all of these competing groups?
Well, I think you have to set the table. You have to come in and put the hard issues on the table and just keep talking. We've built the Youth Connect network of 6 nonprofit organizations, and it took us 1 full year for them to really understand what they meant. They used a lot of the same words, but they didn't mean the same thing. They thought they were doing the same thing and they were doing different things. And so you have to have that backbone that was described earlier, and you have to spend the time. I think we all look for silver bullets, but you have to take time and keep at it, and then one day it starts to unfold. So it took us a year to come up with a common outcomes framework, and then we had to make sure the leaders of the organizations were on board, but then we had to bring the program managers and the staff that really does the work to get to the table to define what needed to be done and to support them. And so it's taking leadership, providing time, and being willing to deal with the hard issues.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. Great discussion. Let's have a big hand for our panel.